Hello and welcome. Thank you all for being here today. I'm Nick Kanoki, Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I am excited for a special ALN Thursday at 3, Digital Transformation, the Art of the Possible, brought to you by the ALN Airport Asset Leadership Board. And as you can see, we have a great panel coming up. But before we get to our speakers for today, we just want to thank our patron members, Jacobs, Mantech, Onuma, ABS Quality Evaluations, and CGI, as well as all our organizational members. And please reach out if you're interested in working together. We would love to talk about how we can amplify your message and your success at your organization. So as far as upcoming events, we have a very special event culminating a good bit of work. Mike, why don't you come in and talk about this event with the National Institute of Building Sciences, I believe.
Yes, that is it. Thank you. My computer is very slow today. I'm clicking to start my video and it's not, so I just have a hi, everyone. Yes, Nick, thank you. Next Thursday, we're having a special program a free event to the National Institute of Building Sciences 50th anniversary conference. And ALN and ALN members are providing a wrap-up presentation for that 50th anniversary conference. And we're really honored. And part of it is interactive demonstration of capabilities with digital twins and AI and asset management. So if you want to participate next week, you'll be able to do online activities with us that build into what we'll be presenting on May 24th. So that's just a little preview for next week. But this week shows how strong the Asset Leadership Network is getting with its members. We have an Airport Asset Leadership Board event that is very hands-on. I have the privilege of being able to see the slides ahead of time. And so I know that this is information that is critical for organizations, not just airports, but all organizations, to understand the steps, the processes to improve. Not that anybody's doing a bad job already, but if you're interested in continuous improvement, today is going to show you paths towards that. So Nick, if you can stop sharing, and we'll let the Jacobs team get started. Janeane, Giarrusso, and Marin Pastar. Thank you for joining us, and let you explain your roles, your different roles at Jacobs, and how you're going to be presenting.
Marin, why don't you go first, and then I'll transfer to myself and kick us off.
Awesome. Can you guys hear me okay and see the screen just fine?
Yes. Can you make it a full screen? It kind of makes it hard for you to know where you're at. Thank you.
You guys see it now?
Yep.
Yes.
Perfect. Perfect. So again, thank you everybody for joining. My name is Marin Pastar. I'm a global technology leader for vertical information modeling, as well as a digital delivery director and global principal for digital twins at Jacobs. And Janeane?
Yeah, hi, I'm Janeane Giarrusso. I'm a co-leader with Jennifer Mims over Jacobs USA Asset Management Group. And one of the key benefits of being in that position is I get to interact with a lot of different organizations and gain that cohesive understanding of what works, what doesn't work. And on today's specific topic, we have some things to share with you. All right, so just kind of moving forward, Marin and I are going to touch on these two topics that are so core and central to digital transformation for airports. And we're going to be followed by Bryan Moore, who's going to show an example of the asset information strategy, a tool that's really great to be used. Bryan Oldham from Denver International is then going to share an example of a digital asset management plan. So Marin and I will set the foundation, and then you'll see these really great examples of those. Okay, so on the next slide, Marin, if you want to progress. Why asset information strategy? I'm super passionate about this. I've seen this over my 24 years of experience of kind of working in this space, that organizations, and in particular in the aviation space, are very keen on getting tools off the shelf, right? We focus on the technology first. But when you start to look at successful implementations and failed implementations coming in to help organizations or help them start from the beginning, one thing that's central is, we all know the phrase, right? Poor data in is poor data out. So having a very strong information strategy while you're going down this digital transformation path or continuing down it is absolutely critical. What we're showing here, as we all know, is data and information is being developed at all phases of the asset lifecycle. So we've got a lot of stuff coming at us. In the ideal space, it's all arranged and providing us with those reports and those metrics that we really need to inform decision making. So on the next slide, what we are highlighting here, that we have information coming in through the asset onboarding process, which is on the left. We've got data that could be being collected out in the field. And ideally, we've got these dashboards of information that are tailored to individuals throughout the organization who need them, who need those information. So the key to that, of course, is having this well-defined hierarchy, how you organize your data, and those standards behind it, what information and attributes you need. When you have that all tightly knitted, then when you're setting up your digital tools to help onboarding or to help data field collection, it's very tight and cohesive and coming at you in an organized way. Next slide, Marin. So an asset information strategy, when we look at industry standards, what is it typically comprised of? Is first of all, identifying what data and information you need, right? What are those metrics? What is the information that supports calculating those metrics? Then you take a look at the asset information standards, right? What are those standards? What's the format? Think of your onboarding process. You get information in all different formats. If you tell contractors how you need it, they're delivering it to you in that streamlined way. Governance, whose roles and responsible throughout the organization for ensuring the integrity of the data, and then what systems do you use? Are they tied together? Are they can staff access the information they need? So as part of an information strategy, thinking through all these components is critical. And the last slide for me before I toss it over to Marin is the common challenges that I've seen, that we've seen within our industry, is identifying the right data. So when we talk about attributes, those details about the assets that inform decision making, there seems to be a low starting point for a lot of organizations of understanding what is the data to calculate those metrics and making that tie. Data analytics, having someone who's analytic, who's actually interpreting that data. Roles and responsibilities for managing data and working in the aviation space and the organizations I've interacted with, that is always a challenge. It's just saying who's responsible and where are those master data sources, and then that onboarding process that is so painful for so many industries, but nailing that down is another challenge. But knowing these key challenges then paves the way for Marin. I'm going to let you talk about those critical steps for digital transformation before we see some examples.
All right, well, thank you, Janeane. Appreciate it. Again, I like to always begin solving any problem by asking what is the problem to begin with. And I forgot to mention when I was doing my introduction, I'm a licensed architect, and I delivered a lot of projects in my past life before I moved to digital. And in my own practice of delivering projects, I saw that this very metric that I'm showing here is painfully true, right? More than 95% of all the data in any capital project delivery, which is the phase where we're defining all those assets, but 95% of all data from design, construction, through handover into operations goes completely unused. So that's all of your O&M manuals, commissioning reports, BIM models, drawings, everything that we work so diligently to produce never gets used in the past design and construction. And that's unfortunate because, again, we all know that that's very critical data that can be leveraged to streamline the facility management operations and the asset management phase of the kind of operational phase of the projects. So again, for every one of you, you probably in your organizations, you probably have and manage a lot of this type of information for your facilities. So you probably get at every project some sort of 3D BIM files of all your projects, the accurate as-built or as designed BIM models and kind of spatial information about your projects. You probably also get a lot of information about, the model manufacturer, all the kind of the asset information that can and should be tied back to the BIM models, if you will, and the O&M manuals, so all the information that typically you request through handover. And you're typically, everybody's operating some sort of a CMMS system, be it Maximo, Archibus, whatever, doesn't really matter. But what I'm trying to bring up over here is, think about all the other systems that get integrated throughout this entire process, all the kind of the IoT, the sensory systems. So all those assets that are actually reporting information and you can gather data from, all of these systems exist and you all manage them. And now manage if you combine all of that data together, what type of operational efficiency you would be getting in everything in one place. You truly are kind of creating, and again, I mentioned one of my passions is digital twins. And I know next week's presentation is probably going to talk a lot about it, but again.
Marin, you accidentally turned off your microphone.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So like I said, imagine if you could bring all this information together and create this sort of a digital twin, if you will, of your facilities that harnesses all the information combined together. You could be doing a lot of different things with all that information, right? And let me, you can still see my screen, right? Everything good? Okay, perfect. So again, if you did federate all that information into one platform, you could have a lot of different types of use cases for all that data. First of all, you could simulate a lot of different types of scenarios for your assets and make sure that you have those asset insights to operate your facilities efficiently. And again, you're able to access all that information digitally, which is really, really critical because again, one study shows that a typical facility manager spends about 5 hours a day actually doing their job and 3 hours a day trying to locate assets or information about their assets. So imagine having all that at their fingertips in the field in a digital format where they can get access to it in a seamless type of fashion. And like I mentioned, you can monitor the performance and streamline that access of all that information inside the CMMS systems and inside different types of ERP platforms. Again, you can really streamline the operations and maintenance process, creation of work orders, executing work orders, and having all that information readily available. And through those live IoT devices and sensors that many of your assets already have, you can monitor the performance, gather those insights. And again, you'll learn next week about AI as well. There's a lot of predictive analytics that can be happening that can be analyzing all that data about operations and putting it into good use. But likewise, again, there's a lot of different types of when you layer that spatial information and asset information and CMMS and all these different types of things together, you can create a lot of different awareness for a lot of different types of use cases for different types of end users. So again, an end user may be a facility manager, maybe real estate, maybe IT, maybe security, but it may be your visitors, it may be the travelers, right? There's a lot of different use cases when you bring that information together. If you control access to the data, what you can create. So a lot of these types of augmented platforms, rather through your cell phones or your iPads or any different types of ways that you can display all that data. And all this sounds great, right? But the problem is, how do you get to that point of where you can layer all that together? And again, we all kind of want to always start at the very end. And a lot of organizations, they want to develop solutions, right? They see some sort of solutions and they want to be developing digital twins, developing asset management systems or whatnot. But that's not the way to start. The way to start is really truly looking at what are you trying to solve? What problem are you trying to solve? How does this align with the core of what your business does, right? And then you start going through this whole process of digital transformation, of defining the deliverables that's going to enable you align with a business case, defining the key performance indicators that would designate, are you being successful? Are you succeeding in this effort, right? Then you look at your existing technology, your new technologies, and aligning technologies that ultimately support that business case. You have to identify champions, both internal and external stakeholders that will help you along the way. Then you're looking for ways to connect all that data, like I said earlier, to make sure, again, that you're performing as you envisioned very early on. And then you go into developing those solutions, evaluating those solutions, and probably going back to this kind of cyclical process of improvement. And this is what digital transformation is about. So, but unfortunately, like I said, a lot of organizations fall for that pitfall of jumping to technologies first, unfortunately. And 70%, some metric is 70% approximately of all digital transformation efforts fail. And they fail for one of three primary reasons. Either number one, they haven't identified the right stakeholders, because this is organization wide. So we got to make sure to align again the entire organization and what you're trying to achieve, and make sure that you have the right stakeholder support and representation in this process, right? The other very common pitfall is trying to do too much and too fast. You may have a very analog process of how you do things right now with very analog tools or manual tools, and you want to go into augmented reality with head-mounted devices and leveraging AI to do things right off the bat, right? Likelihood is, if your organization is not ready for that, you may fail, right? And then again, that last pitfall, which is very, very common, you may see some new technology, you may see a presentation about a great piece of software, and you may go in and say, hey, I really want that for my organization. Well, you need to evaluate to make sure, does that technology align with what you're trying to achieve? And oftentimes it doesn't. And again, you go through a lengthy process of implementations, a lot of different effort, a lot of millions of dollars spent, and then it doesn't work and you fail. So that's why this journey is an absolutely critical part of the process that there's a lot to unpack there that we can't cover in just a few minutes today, but there's a lot to be said about the process of identifying the problem we're trying to solve. So sort of
to the next slide. Can you go back to the last slide?
This one or this one?
This right, there we go. This is a different way of saying use ISO 55001. Establish the business case. What's the objectives? What are you measuring? Who are the stakeholders? So I just, it's clear to me that this is followed right along with ISO 55001, but I wanted to really hammer that home. So thank you for letting me interrupt.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, and unfortunately, there's no shortcuts. If you go through shortcuts, you may be falling for a statistic, unfortunately.
Yes,
and that's why
exactly.
It's a lengthy process. And I typically tell clients, somebody can't just do this for you. They can help you along this journey, but it will take your organization's blood, sweat, and tears to go through this process and to be truly successful and to harness all the efficiencies that you can achieve afterwards. So
Yes,
again, yeah, absolutely. And the summary of kind of a few things of how to get started, what you absolutely need to consider going through this process. Number one is the digital strategy and roadmap, understanding what type of deliverables, what you're trying to achieve, what's your vision for kind of that end state, right? Clearly define that end state, and then look into a roadmap. What makes sense to implement when? Because going all in all at once, again, that's that problematic area where you may fail, right? So having a clearly executed strategy and roadmap is critical. Then again, like Janeane was saying, look, going through the asset management strategy standards. Are you tracking the right things? How are you currently executing? Because understanding what you currently do and how it aligns with your vision and what needs to be improved, and making sure that you have the right type of standards for operations and management before you jump into that process, right? And then looking into, on the previous stage, on the capital project delivery stage, looking into, do I have the standards, the right type of standards to deliver those assets to begin with? So design and construction combined together into this kind of a life cycle execution plan, and digital standards for your architects, engineers, contractors, trades, your supply chain, everybody that procures capital projects. Are they delivering the right information that you need in the format that you need it, right? And then more often than not, even if you have the right definition of what you need, well, how about your architects, engineers, contractors, and everybody else? Do they have contracts and contractual requirements that are saying the same thing what you're expecting? Because you may be expecting to receive something, but unless those contracts say the same thing and align, you may be getting something very different than what you're expecting. And that's a very, very common problem that we see on a lot of different projects that we try to resolve early on, right? And again, even if you implement everything right, and you get these digital twins at the end, tied to your asset management, how are you going to sustain it? your physical environment changes, your digital environment should evolve along with it as well. So having those clear sustainment plans of how can you maintain these types of platforms and information to make sure that they're relevant more than 6 months after handover, right? And then your organizational change management plans, right? You're going to throw all these brand new tools at your staff and everybody in your organization. Are they ready for it? How are you going to train them, support them, show them why is this important? Why? How is this going to make their life easier, right? Otherwise, they're going to take that iPad, throw it out the window, and they're going to go back to doing things exactly how they used to before you gave them all these great tools that can save a lot of their time, right? So again, as you look at your asset information strategy, standards, the data information management, and the systems and the tools you're applying, consider the three most important things. How does every one of those aspects of asset information affect your people? How does it affect the current processes that you have in place to manage it? And how does it affect the technology that you currently have? And do you have the provisions for technology you need to do it in the future? So I'll leave it at that. That was just, like I said, a very brief overview of a very, very important topic that we can talk for a lot longer than this. So with that, I will stop sharing.
Yes,
and pass it on.
thank you for bringing up coffee. We want this to be a very interactive discussion period, and we can make people panelists if people want to. We've got some questions, but I just want to let people know. If you stop sharing, then we'll bring on Bryan more. And this is a perfect transition from architect to construction management software. This is how it actually flows. Thank you, Bryan, for joining us.
Well, thank you for this opportunity this afternoon. Again, Bryan Moore, president and co-founder of Kahua. For those of you that don't know Kahua, Kahua is a leading provider of construction project management software. So you heard from Marin and from Janeane, and I think a lot of the topics and themes that I will be presenting here will be reiterating what they just presented, which I think is a really good thing. So let me start off here.
Can you hit the little button that makes it full screen? It's right next to the slide bar at the bottom right. Thank you.
There you go. So the concept.
I'm glad you're going to be reiterating. It's the same message. It's great to hear it many different ways.
Thank you, Mike. So the concept I want to present today is a concept around asset-centric project management. And the goal here is, how do we basically enable a digital thread throughout the life cycle from idea all the way through closure? And hopefully the objective of this, by doing it, is we actually should drive much better business decisions. So this was highlighted by Marin, which he talked about the study by FMI, in which over 95% of the data is not utilized again. I think what's interesting is when you also look at it from the perspective of standing up BIM, you get the exact same graph. We spend an enormous amount of time and energy creating a model. Only after the model is created, within a year or two, the model has degraded so much that it's not useful anymore from an owner's perspective. So how do we, on a continuous basis, make sure that we have a process in place that is feeding all the various constituents so everyone can do their work downstream? So why does this matter? I came in this industry in 1994, and at majority of the conferences, the theme was majority capital programs are over budget and late. If you roll the clock forward to 2024, at majority of the conferences, you have the same theme, that majority of the projects are over budget and late. A lot of our focus, a lot of the mantra is really just on the design and construction phase, which is just 1 to 4 years. But yet from an owner's perspective, they're concerned about from design for the next 30 to 50 years. And so there's so many different challenges that occur from an owner. They estimate that the cost just for the handover process is between 2 and 4% of the cost of the project. In addition, an owner in the O&M department will spend about 9.4 hours per person per week, either looking for or recreating documents. And then you have the time period between commissioning and 2 to 3 years later, where there's an enormous amount of litigation and claims. And so this industry still looks at things more so from a low cost perspective, but again, how do we get more so to a life cycle cost perspective? So again, that's what we're kind of discussing here today. How do we move from this environment of standing everything up from a single project and then just moving on to the next project? So here's the fundamental problem that we're trying to solve with at least the asset-centric approach. When you're in design and construction, all the players that are engaged on the project, they have their own tools that they're utilizing. And all those tools that they're utilizing are very effective in accomplishing what they need to do, but everything is project-centric focused, right? They're creating all these submittals, these daily reports, punch lists, and everything else. But from an owner, everything is asset-centric focused. And so this presents the challenge of the project after the project. This is that 2 to 4%, the asset handover. Well, today, majority of the owners still get information either on a thumb drive or disk from the contractor. And usually it takes an owner between 1 to 2 years if they were to take that information to get into their system, which presents one of the biggest challenges. And this is why we came up with the methodology of the asset-centric, basically the golden thread. When you look at it from this perspective, if you do a facility condition assessment, but if you look at it from plan, design, build, operate, we continue as an industry, as I mentioned, go from phase to phase in which we create so much information, so much documentation that is valuable, but yet we have a massive drop off to the next phase. And that's what we're trying to resolve. You know, our key approach here with the asset-centric approach is creating that thread such that when we have concept all the way through disposal, we're building upon that information and we're passing that information on to the next phase in the life cycle. So what we have built is we have built a methodology in which the owner would define all of their assets and attributes that they want to track. So up in the top left-hand corner, they would define their taxonomy, what they want to utilize for all their assets and attributes. Then everybody that's on the project would have the ability to be able to link any documents or files now to the asset. So instead of creating all this project information, now you have this information that is linked to an asset. So now we're starting to create value. And that's what we're creating up in the top right-hand corner. We're starting to create this asset data repository that has all this rich information associated with each of the assets that's being put into place. In addition, we're able to feed, again, the asset becomes the lowest common denominator that can feed all these different systems. We're able to feed information to the CMMS system, to commissioning, to the model, to Esri. So on an ongoing basis, instead of looking at this as when the project gets completed, we hand everything over to the owner on a CD or on a thumb drive. As the project is being developed and as asset information is being collected, it's being digitally handed over to the owner to the various systems that are here. So what's exciting is if you had a 4-year project and if in year 1 or year 2, you had X number of assets already in place, you already had all the documentation, that information can be passed on to everybody downstream. In addition, if you're creating a digital twin model, this is where all the asset information from design and construction would always be fed to the digital twin. So this is an example of it in action. You have an asset that basically is going through the process. So it acts as a container. So as documents are being created, as information is being created, we are basically tagging that asset with all the information associated with it. So then what you get at the end is now you get the asset in the middle, and now you can start doing analysis with respect to cost, risk, schedule, design associated with that asset. Instead of receiving 20,000 submittals, 700 RFIs, X number of issues, X number of change orders, you now are able to look at a different lens, a different paradigm on your projects. You now have all your information associated with an asset. What this will do for you going forward, as an owner, you can start looking at your top assets across your portfolio so that on your next project, you can make different decisions based upon what were the design reviews, what were the RFIs, what were the change orders that came in. How can we continuously improve our business practices? What is it we need to communicate differently so we can mitigate the number of documents that are being created, the number of questions that are being created, the number of issues that are being created on a project. And then more importantly, by having this structure, now an owner should be able to have a summary of all the asset type information across their portfolio. So now you can start looking at the assets and determining which ones are end of life, which ones you need to actually replace. Most owners that we have met with the past couple of years, they don't have in a single spot all the asset information across their portfolio to give them a better indication of where they need to focus their time and energy. This was another key point that Marin pointed out, and I do want to emphasize, it's not just about the technology. It's all about the business process too. And we have a process that we call the asset-centric specification. If it's not in the contract, it's not going to get done by all the constituents. So what's critical here is we have a workshop in which we define what the owner's taxonomy is, because usually everybody comes to the table with their own taxonomy, which is a fundamental problem. We define what the business processes are. We define basically a communication spec, a contractual spec on the business processes that will be used by all players. And by doing that, and by being part of the specification, and by working with all the constituents, the general contractor now would have in their system an asset-centric offering that would have all the attributes and all the assets that they need to be able to collect for the owner. And as they're going through their process with submittals and all the other business processes, they're collecting all that information dynamically, and that information is being passed over to the owner. So the objective here would be is as each project goes on, the owner is becoming much more highly digitally proficient. And if the owner is more digitally proficient, hopefully we will reduce the overall risk. And I will hand it back over.
Excellent, Bryan. I think we're going to have you back on a dedicated program on asset-centric specifications. That's critical for the owners to be driving this. And so this is the perfect sequence where we now have an owner, Bryan Oldham, representing Denver International Airport. Bryan, thank you.
Great.
And
hopefully everybody can hear me. I'm trying out some new headphones today.
looking good.
All right, so let me pop this up. All right, so this is really going to build a lot on what Janeane, Marin, and Bryan just talked about. So how do you really take this information and really make it come to life for you? And so if you look at the typical asset management approach, and this has actually been talked about, an organization will say, hey, let's do some asset management. They may or may not know what it is. So they hire some. Yes.
Bryan, we don't see your slides yet. Are you talking slides or not?
Yep. Okay. Hold on.
Let me fix that real quick. All right, let me try sharing, and that will help out a lot. Okay, now can you see the slides?
Not yet on my side.
Not yet.
We practiced, everyone, we practiced this ahead of time. There we are.
All right.
We see them now.
Great. All right, so let's just go back. So typically an asset management project, you start, someone in the organization says, let's do asset management. You hire some consultants. Consultants come in, they develop this great report for you, how to do it, whether it's a strategic asset management plan to get started or something different. Maybe some of the things that Bryan was talking about. Let's start putting things together. But a lot of times, unfortunately, they don't know where to go with that or how to go with that. So the report ends up on the shelf. Year, 2 years, 5 years later, a new group comes in and says, let's do asset management. And another report's created. And that report typically ends in the same place. And so then you really don't get the benefits of doing asset management. You're not putting all of your assets under control. So how do you go about doing this? So things that Janeane and Marin talked about and Bryan talked about with all of this data that you have, the drawings, the asset information, the O&M manuals, how do you really start collecting all of this information, pulling it together to make it really useful? And a lot of people now, and what I was recommending as a consultant is you start doing that plan, do, check, act. If you start using that dimming cycle, say, there's got to be a better way. And nowadays, with all the tools that are in place, you can really start looking at how to do more of a digital approach. And that will help get you to keeping things alive and keeping things active and not just sitting on somebody's shelf and may get pulled out once a year or twice a year. So what I want to do is kind of go through some asset management plans that are now dynamic, actually being used by clients or different companies out in the world. And the first one I'm going to show you is from a water utility. As everyone may remember, I came from the water sector, and this is an actual digital management plan that the client is using. And as you can see here, everything that Marin was talking about and Janeane and Bryan were talking about, everything here is live. Nothing goes into the files anymore at this client unless they can be connected into the asset management plan. And this keeps everything alive. So I'm doing my key performance indicators, my asset inventory and condition. I can do my full risk assessments, that whole life cycle management planning. When do I need to rehab? When do I need to plan to replace? So I can start getting money set aside for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. I can start doing my financial summaries in a quick, 5-second presentation. Here it is for a financial group of here's how much money we're going to need and which year it's going to fall on. This actually is the overview slide that they have, or front end, that actually shows them here's how much the replacement value is. And this was for a specific plant, small plant. Here's how many assets they have. You can see how much useful life is left, the physical score. They're using an A through F scale. You could use a 1 through 5. You could use a 1 through 100, however you want to do it. The key is make this work for you as an organization. With all the tools and technology out there, you can put any data you want on here, but you want to make sure it's going to be useful data that you can take action on. So again, this is just a very high level. They've also taken this, and if you start drilling in, you could actually start looking at the key performance indicators. How many work orders do I have that are PM work orders or corrective action? Or are there other ones that come in that I need to take place or that I need to take care of? How available are all of my assets? Just because they're not running doesn't mean they're not available. So I want to know their availability. For example, I can look at the overall cost. I can look at energy usage. So if I'm really trying to manage my energy costs and have an energy performance contract in place, this starts giving me that key data that I need there. I can really start drilling down into the work orders. What's the number of days that it takes to complete work orders? What's the compliance that I'm working on? Am I, caught up? Am I past due? I can start looking at trends. Am I getting more and more past due, which may be an indication that I need maybe to add another FTE or two. So you can really start pulling data together. I can also start looking at that full-blown risk assessment. As I'm collecting all of my asset data and I'm doing condition assessments and I have my consequence of failure and likelihood of failure scores, I can really start putting that risk matrix and plotting that. So I can really start using to say, hey, I need to go into this top red area, and those are what I need to plan on making corrections to and adjustments to, or replacements or rehabs. I can start really building out my strategy that I need, and then that impacts the financials aspects as well. So here is a client that's actually doing this real time with real data, and this is what they're using it for. They don't have documents sitting on the shelf anymore. And this is an example of some of the financial data that they're using. I'm actually looking at how much operating money I'm going to need, how much maintenance money I'm going to need. And this is all based on parameters that you set up within the system. And how much capital money am I going to need? So they need a total of around, at this time when I took these snapshots, $320 million to make sure over this 13-year period that they were going to stay operational. And you could actually break this down. Again, things that help management really decide. For a different client, you can also, this was used for what if analysis. What is important to me in my capital planning program? Now I can start using different types of risk and say, okay, system risk, I can modify that to maybe 20%. Maybe service disruption is more important, so I put that up to 15%. I can change all of these around, and as I do that, you'll see all of this gets changed around, and the different programs and processes that are identified will now take on different weights and different scoring. So now this is a way I can do what-if analysis using my existing data, and still now I can start getting a prioritized risk assessment and how I should start prioritizing all these programs and projects that I need to have done over the next 5 years, 10 years, whatever your planning horizon is. Now, all of this has been coming from water, but it also works for airports. Even airports can do this. It's not a big issue. And again, it goes back to what Janeane and Marin were saying and Bryan were saying. A lot of it, you have to have good data to be able to get good results out. So here is 2 different dashboards from 2 large airports from around the world, one in the US and one over in Europe. And as you can see, different types of things, but same type of concepts from an asset management standpoint. Risk matrix. I have my asset counts based upon how I have this data sorted. They asked me to block out the values, but you also have all the monies that would be tied to these different groupings. I can select all of these things and it comes up here. Same way over here for this airport. This is actually showing you by gate, by color code, what the issues are with the specific gates. So black happens to be the worst in this scenario, and more the red and yellow are the least impacted. So again, I can look at any gate at this airport and I can tell exactly what type of issues I'm having at the gates. So how many assets do I need to have replaced? Things along those lines. So in this scenario, what you're actually seeing with those colors is the black is where you have multiple assets past their lifespan and they're overdue for replacements, versus the green. So these show up a little bit different, but the green is all the major assets are in good condition. So you have a lot in good condition. You have one that has some major problems, and then you have your yellow and red for different levels. So again, depending upon what you need to make these fit to give you great information that you need to make informed decisions based upon your data. Now, going forward, as these dashboards are getting created and you're collecting information, we're just now really beginning to scratch the surface. You're starting to see and hear things about the artificial intelligence. That's going to come into play as I'm collecting great asset data that everybody else was talking about as well today. Now I can start using that artificial intelligence and machine learning to really start predicting information, like when is something going to break? When do I think it's going to happen? And I can start getting these probabilities and developing models for my assets so I can get ahead of the curve and not always and reduce my corrective actions, be more proactive, and start building out that PM percentage to 65, 70, 80%, and start reducing that corrective maintenance. You'll never get rid of corrective maintenance, but man, if I can start reducing it by predicting things better, we're all going to be better off. That leads right into the Internet of Things. A lot of technology is out there now, so I can start collecting measurements that I haven't been able to before, pressure differentials, temperatures, vibration analysis. All of those things can help go into that learning and predictability so that you can start putting that into your dashboards. And then, of course, Marin talked about the BIM, so I'll just leave that alone. But who else knows what's to come in the future? So it's a very exciting time, and to really get away from those paper documents and take that core information you have, a lot of which is paper, and really make it a living asset management program that you can put out. But again, goes back to quality of data and making sure you know what you want, that end game, before you start building out your system. So any questions?
Well, I just want to say, if you go back one slide, and more. I freaked out when you said and more, because artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, machine learning, and BIM is enough right there. I don't even think that there's anything more beyond that, but yeah, you're absolutely right. So if everyone can join us, and actually, Bryan, you can stop sharing your screen. We can go into discussion. amongst ourselves. And then, like I said, we can have other people join us um, with comments and questions. There's a yellow or a green button that should allow you to stop sharing your screen.
All right.
If you bounce your cursor around the screen share shows up. There you go.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Bryan Moore. Well, actually, I'll just put this to everyone. If everyone can rejoin us, you can turn on your cameras and your microphones. Anecdotal evidence of improvements because of the processes that you've been talking about. I know Bryan's been doing some work at airports. Is there anything preliminary that you're seeing as benefiting from these processes?
Well, I think there's two things that I would speak to. One of the things that we're just focused on in the short term is removing all the duplicate data entry for a lot of the key business processes in collecting this information. I think that's one of the most key components for us as an industry to resolve. It's not very exciting to try to hire a young college grad into this industry and have somebody say, please enter the data into this system and then enter the data over here. So for us to be able to put a foundation in place in which all the constituents are utilizing the same system, so you're entering data once, you have your own project record, is so critical for this industry, which provides better visibility and more efficiency for all players. Because again, when you get into duplicate data entry, we're not talking about just a few records here. We're talking about thousands upon thousands of records that get entered in on majority of the airport projects. A lot of times that duplicate data entry is going to be incorrect. So to have that visibility real time, that's one of the key things that we're seeing by having a system like this in place.
Thank you. And Janeane or Marin, can you answer this question that we have here? Is this about one software application or a dashboard that pulls together multiple data sources? Your microphone, Janeane.
I think that question came up when Bryan Oldham was presenting, I believe.
I think
Sure.
so, yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah.
Bryan, why
Sure.
don't you go ahead?
So it's actually using both of everything you saw except the one green slide was all built on Power BI, but it's pulling from multiple data sources. It's pulling from CMMS systems, it's pulling from Excel, it's pulling from other systems as well. So the beauty of having and Power BI is not the only one that you can use. There's several out there, but they can pull from multiple systems and give you that single pane of glass look and feel. So the end user doesn't need to worry about where the data is coming from. They know it's pulling and it's the right data that they need to see. That's why it's really important to go back to what Marin was saying. It's like you need to have, and Bryan, you need to have that end game in mind first to know what you want to put on those dashboards. It's very, very critical.
Yeah, the one thing I would just add to your comment there, this is why it's so critical for the owner upfront to define the taxonomy that's going to be utilized by all constituents. And for the owner to even have the same taxonomy amongst the various systems that they're utilizing. If you're going to be pulling all this information together into one spot in Power BI as the example that was given, you have to have that nomenclature has to be consistent across all of them, or you will get kind of bad reports.
Exactly. And so, yeah, so we actually have data standards in place here at DEN that everybody that's designing for DEN has to use those data standards. So the nomenclature on how everything's named is the same, no matter if it's what vendor it may be that's designing for us. They're all using the same standards manual to make sure that that does happen, because otherwise you will not be able to have effective use at the end.
And then let me throw another wrench into this whole conversation as well. Likelihood is your organizations, I've heard of organizations having 2 or 3 or 4 ERP systems, right? Is there such a thing as 4 or 5 different ERP systems? Is it really an ERP system if you got 4 of them? But the reality is you likely have many different data sources already for the millions of square feet of facilities that you already have. So not only do you kind of have to create a fresh start moving forward, here's the standard that we use, but you also have to start thinking about, okay, but what about the rest of my portfolio? How do I get that data normalized and connected into the new, better way of doing things? And that's,
Exactly.
again, that's what you have to define, and you have to say, this is what I want to do. And then again, look through your best solution, best options for platforms for normalization of how to move forward. But it starts with you. It starts with you saying, enough of this nonsense. Let's move forward in a better way. Let's solve this problem. And I guarantee you a solution is there. It may not be sitting on the shelf, but again, you can define it, you can execute it. It only takes willpower and time and effort. That's all it takes.
And I think the key thing here is if owners can mandate this process, can get this standardization to occur, the key value proposition then is we now have all this asset information that can help us make better decisions, not only for the next 30 to 50 years, but for the next project or program that's coming back up. And I think that's what's critical here. For so many decades, we stand up a project, as I mentioned before, and we walk away, we just start up the next project. We lose all that information and knowledge. And this is where owners can drive change here, drive a new business process, make it a contractual obligation, so that we're starting to collect information from a different lens. We're not just collecting all these various documents. All these documents now are associated to an asset. So now, based upon that asset type in our portfolio, how do we perform as an organization? Is that asset doing well? We could have 80 or 90 of those assets. So it's very helpful to start structuring it this way to help us make better decisions.
I'm glad you brought that up again, because I think your movement from project management to asset-centric management is the key. A project ends and people go away. But an asset mentality is about the life cycle. And if owners can help do that, and that's especially important, I think, at airports where you basically have a small city. And that's why I love the ALN Airport Asset Leadership Board, because it's so applicable to every type of industry. It has water, it has transportation, it has all of these things, and they're all using assets together. So, Janeane, can you help us understand how airports can institute this owner-led approach to shifting from project mindset to asset mindset?
You're a little choppy, but I believe I understood your question. How can setting up strategies to help airports shift from that project mindset to the asset mindset? So, kind of going back to a theme I spoke about earlier. Was it earlier this week? Last week? I don't know. It's, the focus on the people is pretty critical. And a couple of the panelists already mentioned it, that business process. So the business processes around data management in particular is what we're talking about here, and establishing those to get the source data into those systems. And one of the key things that I've experienced in working with a lot of different organizations is that challenge around specific data governance, the defined roles and responsibilities, and where those master sources of truth. That seems to be such a huge sore point, and yet, here we want to base all this series of decisions on the integrity of that data. So one of the things that I always stress is having those strong governance strategies in place. And then in addition to just defining those business processes, having those strategies such as exception reports that you can use your technology to identify discrepancies in data or issues around the data that then get routed to someone who's responsible for follow-up. So there are these things that to implement to ensure that people are really managing the data, which is so incredibly important because you're basing decisions on that. So when we talk about going back to the question around project-centric to asset-centric, that's part of that discussion of the people and the way they work together and the why surrounding that process.
I'd love to tie on to that a little bit as well. Again, nobody likes change, right? If you're doing something right now, in order for change to happen, and I kind of had this in a slide before, the kind of formula for change, people are going to change only if they are thoroughly dissatisfied with how things work right now. If they have a clear vision of how they would like for it to work in the future, and if they have clearly defined next logical steps, attainable steps to make their life better, right? And if all that is greater than the resistance to change, change is possible, right? It sounds like a simple formula. There's a lot to it. But again, we need to make sure that we're defining, if we're trying to fix something, why doesn't what we do right now work? And how can we make it better, right? And that in itself is a simple exercise. But if you look at why should we switch to asset-centric management? Okay, well, what's wrong with what we do right now? And what are we missing out on, right?
Great point. I just want to add one comment to that around why change. I think we also need to ask the question, are the things we're doing today, are they adding value? And given the asset-centric approach here this past year, the major theme that I heard from almost every single owner is they're getting very little value at all from the content that the general contractor is handing over to them, again, on the thumb drive or the CD. It's not in a format that they can actually utilize or harness. But yet, if you go back, the general contractor is just saying, hey, I checked the box. I gave the owner what they wanted. And we've been doing it like this for decades and no one said anything. But yet you look at how much time and energy is spent. And it's not throughout the project. At the end of the project, when everyone's scurrying to leave off the project, we're sending so many people back to collect all this information so that we can hand it over. So there's an enormous amount of inefficiency that is created by this process. We're handing it over. Most owners keep it on the CD. They don't access the information. So, I mean, what a great opportunity for us to kind of revisit this and say, why are we doing it this way? Is there a much better way that we could do it? It could be much more effective, in which we're giving the owners the information that they need so they can better manage their facilities and operations for the next 30 to 50 years.
Brian, I'm so happy that you mentioned that. And that's why I mentioned that earlier point as well. What do your contracts say? What are you asking for, right? If your contracts are 10, 15 years old and you're still asking for the same deliverables you did from back in the day, you're not going to get anything different that's going to be useful to you. That's why it's really, really important to make sure you revisit, you work with your procurement very, very closely to align the deliverables and the expectations to the capabilities of what we can produce today. And oftentimes, like I said, 99.9 times when I look at any contracts where we try to assess this, they are not aligning with what the owner is expecting. So my encouragement to you is go look at what your contracts are asking for your vendors to produce, and then ask yourself, is this really what I need? And it starts there.
Bryan Oldham, can you comment from the airport on that specific issue?
Yeah, I definitely agree with all that. And I would also add, in addition to looking at the contracts you have now, that you also need to have some change management, or potentially need change management with your internal people themselves, because you will get people say, well, this is how I've always been doing it. Why do I need to change now? So it's not only changing on the contractor side, but some cases it'll also be changing your internal people as well and get them on board and breaking down those barriers. It's like, well, I'll turn over the asset stuff at the end of the project, which is way too late to be turning over asset data. And so you've got to make sure that the current people that you're working with at your organization are also on board and they understand why you're trying to do it, the benefit they get as well as you. So
great point, Brian, because I would add from an internal perspective, a lot of our focus and discussion today has been around O&M, but there's so many of the people downstream like finance, compliance, security that need all this asset information in order for them to do their jobs for the next 50 years.
And I will mention the importance of right sizing what you ask for. Just because you may be asking for 10-year-old information, you may go in and say, well, I'm going to ask for all of it, right? I'm going to ask for LOD 500 as-built BIM models with all the Kobe asset data to the T, right? And then if you don't do anything, again, if you don't really know what you want and you ask for all of it, likelihood is you're not going to get the quality you want, and the people delivering it to you know that you're not going to do anything from it just by seeing what you're asking for.
Yep.
And they're still going to deliver a checkbox. Yep,
exactly.
I got it. I gave you BIM models and I gave you Kobe data with absolutely all the assets, right? Knowing that you won't validate it, you won't even look at it, you're just going to put it on a digital shelf and it's not going to do absolutely anything for you.
Exactly.
So right sizing, making sure you're very specific as to what you want and making sure you're going to use it downstream and know exactly how you're going to use it. So,
well, we have an oversized amount of information here. We're at the top of the hour. We understand that some people have to drop off, and that's fine, but this discussion is going too well to end. And we also have Jeffrey Freemeyer from Mantech, an ALN patron member who's joined us and will be commenting. Also, he brings in some experience from when he was with Jacobs about the Air Force. Jeff's been making comments. Jeff, can you talk about airport asset management from what your experience has been?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great point, just from managing data, and, kind of going back to the mission aspect of, what it is that you're trying to do. So, airports have a lot of different missions that they're trying to complete, and same with the Air Force. And what we found in that environment is you're playing this balancing act between all of the the subsets of missions that are happening. And I think having the data to be able to inform some of those decisions is important. Being able to understand how do you balance out the different mission sets, how do you make good investment decisions based on who needs what, right? I mean, you can look at thinking back to the airport map there, where you have the different gates and the different rankings of how well that asset is performing. Having that governance structure is pretty key. But I also believe, like, also in here is, we're talking a lot of like tactical planning type stuff. You got people out in the field that are responsible for this, so how do we get that tactical level data rolled up into a strategic so we can see it on a dashboard? That's a hard lift. So how do we influence people's behavior and integrate it into the business process so that we can actually have them doing the heavy lift, so we're not recoding data, we're not asking them to do a special project to go out and measure things again. So, I mean, to me, I think those are some of the key elements that you can see across not only the Air Force, but airports, so, what are all those different mission sets, and how do you kind of get into the lower level decision-making there?
ALN senior fellow and board member Jack Dempsey was crucial in developing a mission dependency index that the military has been using, and I know the Air Force has been using. Has anybody seen this type of approach to assessing mission criticality from assets? How are people establishing what the critical assets are at airports? Bryan Moore, can you start?
Well, again, I think this is where it becomes really important from a system perspective. I think every owner is going to be different in terms of what they want to track. I think Marin kind of mentioned this, right? You may want to track an enormous amount of stuff, but it's like an accordion. You have to define what's important to you. What we have seen with our customers is everybody is unique in defining those attributes that define whether an asset is important, not important. They have various formulas that are calculating whether or not something should be replaced. There's means and methods for those that are industrial engineers like myself, that there's like a Y-bell analysis out there that can tell you the mean time to failure for an asset. So you would basically know, based on all the assets in your portfolio, where should be allocating dollars based upon a potential failure that may occur in 2 years. So again, I think it really goes back to, I know we use a lot of words like AI and machine learning, but a lot of this we've been doing for a long time, when we're just doing analysis of all the assets that we have and trying to make what's the the probability of an asset failing, and then based upon that, how important is that asset? Because you don't want to be allocating dollars to assets that aren't critical to your operations. And so there's multiple ways that each owner is defining that, where they're trying to categorize that. And then once you do that, then it goes back to having that that Power BI dashboard, so you can very quickly see and then group and process certain assets together, so you can start creating like a 5-year plan based upon what your findings are.
Oldham, how does Denver International Airport assess or define critical assets?
Yeah, so we took a fairly methodical approach to it. And the first thing we needed to do when I got here is to define what was a run to failure asset versus what is a rehab and replace asset. And then we went through and said, what's critical, right? Because if we defined what a critical asset was, if it shuts down the airport, if it shuts down us delivering passengers to the airplane, keeps the planes from leaving. And so we went through and marked those assets as well. And then at that point, as we're doing the condition assessments, then we can do the risk scores. And then we can start saying the higher risk critical assets get first attention and things like that. And so we built a fairly methodical approach to it. But again, you have to know what the assets are and how you're going to plan to handle those assets as run to fail or rehab and replace, and then define the criticality.
Janeane, is there any process that critical assets are established in the planning stages that you've seen?
Yeah, just more of a nugget to share that I think when I work with different organizations and airports, this comes up when people bring up the concept of criticality, right? We're trying to identify that consequence of failure. If this asset failed, how would it impact our service delivery, whether I'm in the terminal space or in an outbuilding? And one interesting foundational consideration, and certainly both ways are successful in applying criteria and doing that, because criticality is a relativity, right? This is more critical than this one. So if I only have this much money, I'm going to focus on the more critical one, right? People will do it by location, and it seems to be tied to your organizational makeup. So if you have asset maintenance crews, operations and maintenance crews that are dedicated by location, that criticality analysis is suited for putting that relative, where do I spend this crew's time on these sets of things? Now, if you're doing criticality across systems, an HVAC system, a plumbing system, and you've got specialty contractors that are going around to all the different locations and doing that, doing criticality within that space and within an asset system is a consideration. So I think my only add, in addition to what people are saying, is that the approach to criticality really ties strongly to that organizational structure, because you're using that information for certain reasons, to prioritize maintenance, to prioritize capital repairs. So keeping that end in mind, right, helps inform, to me, that breadth of the criticality analysis.
I'll just add again.
See you nodding. Yeah. Go ahead,
Marin.
please.
I was gonna say I'm not gonna add much to it, what everybody else said. I'm not gonna repeat it, but sometimes less is more, right? If you're asking somebody to deliver and track 50,000 assets for a facility, and they deliver 20,000 assets, you think, wow, I got 20,000 assets. 20,000 must be good, but you're only tracking half of what you asked for, and likelihood is you're not having the right information to begin with about those assets that you asked for. But on the flip side, if you ask for 100 assets instead of 50,000 assets, and you got 95, you're probably providing a lot more value with 95 assets than 10,000 assets. So it's all about assessing that criticality and making sure that information you asked for and expected, that you're actually getting and tracking and doing something with. So actionable data, not just the volume of data, right?
Okay, then I want to do a little exercise where I ask each of our panelists to pretend they're talking to an airport owner. And what would you say to them if you had 2 sentences or just 2 minutes to talk to them? Bryan, Oldham, you probably are doing this every day. We'll save you for last. And then we've got a special announcement from Jeff Freemeyer, and then we'll wrap things up. So Janeane, what would you tell an airport? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not going to put you on that spot. Will you
It's
tell the
okay.
story?
It's okay. It's okay. About
will you
information.
No, will you tell the story about the airport that is setting up the asset control center?
Wait, how am I tying this back to your question? I would be telling
you're
the
not,
airport
I forgot I wanted everyone to hear this story about the airport. I believe it's in North Carolina.
Yeah, Raleigh. All I can share is Mike's put me on the spot to share. Oh no, just that I had been involved in helping them lay out some initial thoughts around their vision is to create a command center. Name unknown, but the point being is it really underscores the digital transformation piece and creates that art of the possible. Imagine you're in the command center and you've got digital dashboards of key information and metrics that you need to do your job. And within that command center are different roles and responsibilities that need to collaborate and communicate. Right now, we're using a lot of email or phone calls or those types of things. They were identifying those key players that would benefit from being physically close together for discussion purposes while they're ingesting this digital data that's being presented to them. So anyway, that's the vision, art of the possible. That's the share mic. So now I don't have to answer your question.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Marin, what would you tell an airport owner if you were in an elevator with them?
Well,
Or her?
most airports have some sort of capital improvement projects that are constantly ongoing, right? So my question is always, do you think you're getting your money's worth out of the whole process? Are you making sure that you're asking for the right information from your designers, your contractors, your trade subcontractors, your vendors? And are you sure that when those projects gets handed over into your teams for asset management, do you have everything you need to make the right decisions about your facilities? And if your answer is no, how can we help? Right?
Excellent. Bryan Moore?
I basically would state that it's all about mitigating risk. And as I mentioned up front, if we can provide better visibility, right? Because there's so many constituents that are at the table on these very large programs that occur. If we could provide better efficiency in terms of passing all the data and documents between all the systems and provide the owner with the information that they need to start doing analysis to do better decisions, again, going forward, as compared to also on new projects. So it's all about trying to mitigate risk and put them in a position to understand what they have in their portfolio.
Excellent. Thank you. Bryan Oldham, what are you trying to get your Phil Washington to do that he didn't do last month or the month before that?
So what I've really been focusing on and what we've been focusing on here, Dan, is really that whole life cycle. So it's coming in and asking the basic questions is like, if the person isn't familiar, where do they really think asset management starts? It's not once it's already built and operational. It starts way back in the design phase. And then we go and say, do you know what assets you have and what condition they're in? Because now, once you start designing it and planning for it, now knowing the condition, now I can start building that life cycle. And then I will ask, how are you planning that asset life cycle? Or, and so really trying to get them to think from beginning to end of that whole life cycle process for any asset within the airport. So
excellent. Well, thank you. I'm sorry that my bandwidth is so low. I'm keeping my camera off so that you can hear me properly, but you'd see a big smile on my face because this nailed everything that I wanted for this program. And I thank our panelists so much for taking the time to make things simple. Lincoln wrote a letter to his wife, said, sorry, this letter is so long. I didn't have much time. If I had more time, it would be a shorter letter. I know how much time it takes to put together these concise, wonderful presentations, and I thank you very much for them. And before we go to Nick to wrap things up, we've got a very special announcement from Jeff Freemeyer at Mantech. Jeff, you want to talk about the Society of American? Jeff has been working at with the Society of American Military Engineers for 3 years. He is a spearhead on their facility asset management track. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, so thank you, Mike. So we actually have a survey out, and I don't know if you guys saw that come across your inbox today, but we're looking for a wide variety of folks to answer, the survey. It's like about a 10-question survey, a lot of asset management type questions in there, everything from budgeting to staffing, and all of like the ISO 55000, kind of categories. And what we're doing is we're looking at that information, kind of a benchmarking study that we're going to kind of preload the conference session with, what does it look like out in the market? And so with that, we're going to have, an in-brief session to, senior leaders from the DoD are going to be kind of, voicing their concerns, kind of giving us concepts and ideas and things that kind of rise to the top of their issues, for us to discuss. And then we're going to have, our own sessions where we're going to have a panel of more kind of mid-level, senior level, kind of management folks in there discussing, those issues, looking at the results of this benchmarking study. And then the following day, we're going to go ahead and have an additional breakout session where we're going to break up into smaller groups where, folks that are attending the conference can sit in on one of those groups and actually come up with some, no kidding, what's our game plan for trying to solve some of these issues. The ultimate, outcome from this is what's known as an IGE, an industry government engagement, where it's more of a formalized research project where we go out and understand and develop, the different courses of actions on how we might solve some of those particular problems, and then bring those recommendations back to the SAMI environment, where then, the whole industry, the Department of Defense can kind of move out and doing that, making those recommended changes. So it can be everything from, like a policy change is one thing, the way we do business is another thing. So all of those things. So we're looking forward to it, and we hope to get some really good input on everything. And we are planning on using the results of, kind of the survey itself and gathering more data at the conference itself, and then circling back with ALN and kind of presenting, that information, to, this whole group as well. And so for those folks that actually, participate and, give us, some contact information, those results will be available, and we will be sending out that to the group so that you can kind of see it and churn through it and have more lively discussion.
Excellent.
So that's what I had. So back over to you, Mike.
That means that if people participate in the survey, they will be able to help influence Department of Defense facility asset management activity in a small way. So
Correct. It'll be a good counterpoint for, how are other people doing business today, and can we take those concepts and move it into how Department of Defense does business.
So we'll post the link to the survey on the website. We'll send it out again to people who want it. Art, I see you want that, and I'll send it to you. And the event starts May 14th, so we're looking for people to do this in the short term. And we're really honored that the Society of American Military Engineers has reached out to the ALN to help get increased survey results. So thank you, Jeff.
All righty. And thank you to ALN for helping support the effort too.
Appreciate it. And thank you all. This has been a great session. I wish you could all see the smile on my face. This has been very enjoyable, informative. Appreciate all the attendees. And again, thank you to all the panelists. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.